Well, hello there, boys and girls. My name is Methosarcina Barkeri. Well, that's a mouthful, so I just go by Barker. Today, I'm here to teach you about what we call methanogenesis. Hopefully, by the end of our time together, you'll feel like you learned something about methanogenesis and how it impacts your life. Come on, let's get this started. First, let's talk about what methanogenesis is. It's a metabolic process where microbes like myself eat some hydrogen gas and some other carbon source, either CO2 or acetate, and do all kinds of fun doohickey things, and will come up with CH4, or what we call methane. It's usually used by life forms called archaea, like me, or a separate type of life form from bacteria and eukaryotes like yourself. We live in fairly extreme environments and do some pretty cool stuff like methanogenesis. There are two types of methanogenesis, acetoclastic and hydrogenotrophic. Let's first talk about this acetoclastic pathway. It's the one that I use. Acetoclastic pathway kind of does what it sounds like. It takes acetate, which we talked about earlier, and breaks it down eventually into methylene. By converting acetate into what we call acetyl-CoA, the stage is set for a return back to a methyl-based form called the methyl H4spt. Now that's a serious mouthful. Once it's back into a form shared with the hydrogenotrophic pathway, which we'll talk about in a minute, it continues its destiny and is converted into methane.
But the real star of this show is my good friend Coenzyme A, or Co-Ash for short, as we call her around these parts. She's so important to me because she really gets this pathway going. She can take that there acetic acid or acetate, kind of the same thing, just missing hydrogen, and cleaves it or cuts it into that methyl group and the other stuff, and we take that methyl group and carry it on down the pathway. Tell you what, wouldn't want to run into her into a dark alley. That'd be scary. But all jokes aside, I don't know where I'd be without her. Oh, well, that's not true. I'm pretty sure I'd be dead.
Now let's talk about this hydrogenotrophic. It's probably the most common of the two pathways. Now, hydrogenotrophic methanogenesis presents a teeny tiny problem. It doesn't produce as much methane as acetoclastic counterparts. You might be thinking, why use it then? Well, the answer is pretty simple. There's a ton more hydrogen gas and CO2 available than there is acetate, so it just makes sense to use what's available. So the majority of all this methane, it comes from the hydrogenotrophic pathway. This happens by taking hydrogen gas and CO2 and converting into formal, then methyl derivatives before, and all these, well, you gotta take a look at this. Look at all these THMPs and FMNs and all them fancy things.
Actually, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a few minutes and talk about these little guys here. They're enzymes and coenzymes. In this particular case, our good friend THMP, his full name is tetrahydromethanopterin, and you can tell why he has a nickname. He's a coenzyme. He's actually one of the top dogs of coenzymes in this C1 process. When we talk about C1, we're just talking about which type of carbon is being used. So this C1 process, it's the basic strategy in methanogenesis. It's after to covalently bind a C1 species to C1 carriers like THMP at different oxidation states. That other molecule, MFR, as we saw, does the same thing. It's the initial acceptor molecule before it moves to THMP.
Anyway, it takes it all through these methyl derivatives before eventually making it to methane.
Wow.
You want to know the best part about me? I'm one of the few archaea that can do both of these pathways. Of all my friends and family, distant crazy cousins, nobody can do what I can do. Instead of doing one or the other, when acetate concentrations are really high, because I prefer the acetoclastic pathway, I can actually switch to eating hydrogen gas and CO2 instead of that acetate. Because it's just too much little stress on my belly when there's all this acetate flying around. Now you may be wondering why this is such a big deal. But if you were going to starve to death, wouldn't you want to change what you were eating? It could quite literally save your life.
Turns out, though, there ain't too many shared enzymes between the pathways. There's a lot of different ones going on, but there are a few we can talk about. But the ones that we do share have to do with this COMPAR, or coenzyme M as we call it. This enzyme is needed to go from that 420H plus stuff as we saw earlier and to come out with the final product of methane. The three enzymes that are shared are the heterodisulfide reductase, and that switches out the COM or the coenzyme M, and then the F420H2 dehydrogenase, which transfers the electrons to an electron transport chain, which we need that in a second, because the other one we share is the ATP synthase, which capitalizes on that proton motive force and make ATP, or energy for the cell.
Now, if I ain't done blowing your mind, I'm gonna blow your mind now. Because did you know that there are methanogens likely living in your belly? There are a few of my crazy distant cousins that I talked about that like to take up a spot in the human gut. And that's where they do all their work. Most of the time, they aren't doing too much, besides adding a little of that smell of that flatulence you get every once in a while. But never mind that. But when it comes to too many of these little guys, dadgum, it can get real hairy. Some recent studies have shown that too many or overpopulation of these methanogens are likely leading to some metabolic disorders like anorexia, obesity, or malnutrition. And even sometimes you can see lesions like colon cancer. Now talk about some nasty stuff. Just for the too many gosh dang cousins running around in there. Them little rascals. Well, alrighty there, folks. That wraps up our little tour of the good old-fashioned Methanogenesis. Well, I just think pretty cool stuff that little guys like me can eat other stuff than glucose and turn into some pretty stinky stuff like methane. I hope you enjoyed your time today, and we'll see you next time.